Once those rushes became more intense, you became more fearful. You began to feel the presence, you began to feel the activation, which is typical of anxiety, because we begin to stimulate the right hemisphere.
Charles Tart.
I'm not doubting that the electromagnetic stimulation had some effects on your brain, but the big question of how you interpreted that still remains primarily a psychological question. I mean, let's face it, our culture, and I speak of our whole Western culture now, does not encourage people to be aware of what we might call the supernatural or the psychic or the spiritual. It encourages them to repress it. It tells them this sort of thing doesn't happen, it shouldn't happen. If it does happen, it probably means you're crazy. So naturally, people are going to suppress being aware of these experiences. They're going to happen less often to people because there's a psychological pressure to hold them down. And if they do happen, they're going to be explained away in ordinary terms, even if that's really stretching ordinary explanations. You know, oh, I must have been ill, so that, it must have been the medicine I was taking. We have all sorts of preferred explanation systems to make the spiritual side of things go away.
Diary, Vancouver. You think too much, cautioned Anila, a Tibetan nun. She makes a good point, as does Lama Kalden. I asked him whether I live too much upstairs in my head. He agreed, in a pleasant way as always. Intellect gets in the way of clear thinking. I am obsessed with coming to terms with our haunted house in the Rockies. Persinger's octopus told me the apparition under the house, the knockings, those feelings of terror, and the general oppressive atmosphere about the place, all of it, was likely conjured in my head. I can accept that. The device was plugged into a computer, and me into it. But what it didn't explain was exactly where those subtle energies in the Rockies, the electromagnetic fields which affected my temporal lobes, were coming from.
Your account is extraordinary in the normal everyday experience of most people, but when you've been exploring these areas for many years, as I have, it's pretty standard, as a matter of fact. And the idea...
Paul Devereaux heads the Dragon Project Trust, a worldwide team of scientists who study claims of unusual energies at prehistoric sites. He's also the author of 20 books on the subject. We're talking in New York's Central Park.
So it probably goes back also to Chinese traditions like feng shui, of siting places, tombs, homes, habitations, and the house you had in the Rockies was obviously sited to what a Chinese geoman would call bad feng shui, because there were geophysical conditions there that could produce mood changes, affect your consciousness, it could even manifest geophysical light forms.
Paul Devereaux has a theory of earth lights. It complements Michael Persinger's tectonic strain theory, TST. Persinger correlated reports of luminous events over many, many years and found the lights in the sky and related phenomena clustered along earthquake faults. It persuaded him to theorize that tectonic strain was creating the conditions in the Earth to release anomalous balls of light on the surface. This has been demonstrated when you put quartz, for instance, under great pressure. When it finally gives and explodes, a burst of light manifests. Electromagnetic radiation, too.
And it's important to realize that there is an interface between these two phenomena. In very, very active so-called haunt areas, it's not unusual to see small balls of light and luminous displays, which are often, if they're intense enough, confused with and become a part of the UFO mythology.
EM radiation and a lot of other forms of radiation can account for a certain subset of the reports we get.
Michael Stranick investigates UFO sightings for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. He lives in Vancouver.
I know a researcher in Oregon, Greg Long, has done extensive research on orange balls of light, which are probably the byproduct of EM radiation from the tectonic strain. And these can be seen as balls of light, which actually appear to have intelligence behind them. They will follow the terrain and so forth. This may account for some UFO reports.
It's as least as likely that aliens are visiting Earth as it is that electromagnetic fields are creating UFOs.
Chris Rutkowski. He's in the Extension Department at the University of Manitoba. A former professor of astronomy, he's also a keen investigator of UFO lore.
When I hear of somebody saying that they were visited in their bedrooms last night by an alien who wanted to abduct them, there's no question that they had a real experience. But the question is, what really happened? The temporal lobe possibility is another viable explanation. So I think that the TST and EMF are certainly possible theories, but in order to embrace them, I think we have to go through a long process before we can do that.
There's lots of twitching that's coming up, coming and going, and there's like it's like I want to see something. It's not in focus or whatever. It's comes and goes. It's just like a desire there. Diary. If an unidentified flying object landed in your midst, and it didn't match your concept of what a flying saucer was supposed to look like, would you see it? Could you?
I think there may be a problem if there is something that goes radically against what we assume things are supposed to look like. We will reinterpret them. That's what the brain does most of the time. Tries to make sense out of chaos. Would we see it or could we see it? I think that's the question. Maybe some things are just beyond our perceptual ability.
Diary. Landscapes are inhabited, even when they're empty. Is it possible to know the extraordinary by the shadow it casts? Diary. Las Vegas. Met with Dean Radin at his home. Soft-spoken, very articulate man. Looks kind of fragile. A stiff wind off the desert might have an unfortunate effect.
There's the possibility that some of the hallucinations and illusions associated with apparitional experience are probably related to the brain's purpose, in a sense, which is to create a stable reality. And if something compromises the brain's ability to do that, either through sleep deprivation or drugs or who knows what, the capability of being able to create that stable image will begin to decline. So the metaphor here is the computer Hal from the movie 2001. And as we saw, when the memory of Hal was being pulled out, Hal's ability to speak and to reason and do everything else began to decline as well. And so something like that is probably occurring because it's no coincidence that most apparitions, the vast majority of apparitions, are seen around 3 o'clock in the morning, either in the process of waking up or going to sleep or suddenly waking up, but a non-ordinary state. In which case you can say that the model of reality being created by the brain at that time is no longer the ordinary state. It's not the ordinary model either. In which case you're not dealing with ordinary reality, at least the way that you perceive it.
So my state was similar to Hal's, the computer in the movie 2001. Stuff was taken away.
Or put in. In other words, just that the environment had changed from its normal operating procedure and context, and anything which changes the environment, whether it's adding or subtracting or good or bad or who knows what, all of it will change the way that you perceive the world around you. That doesn't necessarily mean that what you're perceiving is illusionary in the sense of not objectively real, but it does suggest that a large part of the affect associated with it, the feelings of profound meaning and awe and fear and all of the emotional stuff, is very likely to be an illusion as well. But you can see that this often happens in psychic experience, that somebody will have a vision or see a ghost or something, and the meaning associated with that is absolutely unbelievable and can change their life. But the question is, if they're getting a visual illusion, could there not also be an emotional illusion? And the answer is very likely.